All right, guys, we're going to go ahead and we're going to do a walk along and basically review the inspection. So, just to recap, the inspector, their key role is to look at a property, right? A lot of them don't even have construction experience, but they do have experience for looking for potential catastrophic defects, right? Do they see water damage? Do they see potential burn marks from electrical shortages, or they just look around and they just annotate all the current defects that could potentially break the deal in the future or reduce its property asking price. The key thing is that this is all happening during the inspection period. Okay, so this is like the busiest part for the buyer because this is where they get to determine whether are they going to move forward with the deal or not. Is the property in a good enough condition to purchase and for you to live in? So, yeah, this all this inspection period is noted in the purchase contract. Okay, so here is an example of an inspection period. Okay, so let's just say that on May 4th you submitted a purchase contract to buy a property. Okay, and you give them until May 5th at 5 p.m. to respond. All right, let's say now the seller accepts the contract at on May 5th at 2 p.m. Right? What happens next? Well, if you recall, in the purchase contract, the normal period is 10 days. So the seller signs the purchase contract agreeing to give you 10 days to physically look at the property and review it to determine if there's any catastrophic defects and if you want to move forward. Now, remember, if the seller accepted on May 5th at 2 p.m., basically, right, we're basically going to have until May 15th at 5 p.m. to submit something called a BINSR, a buyer inspection and seller response. Okay, so that's called a BINSR, and the BINSR is basically a list of all the line items that talk about what you request to be fixed or not fixed, or if you leave the BINSR blank, like, hey, listen, you know what? I'm too afraid to lose this deal. I don't even want to ask the seller for any concessions or to do anything. But we're gonna have a specific section on BINSR. In this section, we're just talking about the inspection report and physically walking the lot. Now, here are the two benefits of using Inspector. Okay, one, you're with all the emotions that are running through your first time purchasing a property. They have the ability to help guide you and look for catastrophic defects. The second thing for inspectors and why it's important to use them is that they are a bargaining chip for the buyer. So let me tell you a little story about this last deal I worked on. Um, okay, so in my last deal in Chandler, we had a seller that had some cracked tiles. Okay, we have Saltillo tiles in Arizona. It's really popular. It's very Spanish style, and they're pretty sweet. But the inspector noticed that there were some cracked tiles, okay, on the roof, and because of the cracked tiles, the buyer demanded and requested a new roof. And keep in mind, like, there was no water damage or any signs of leakage from the roof, and the seller didn't want to give the buyer a new roof before the close of escrow because actually we'll go over that part here. Um, the seller didn't concede because, one, there was no actual like water damage or signs of catastrophic defects, that the roof was defective. The other thing too is that there's something called a clue report. The clue report basically does a insurance history review of the roof or anything that has associated with that property, determine if there's any insurance claims made on the property. Now, naturally, if someone makes a claim on an insurance claim on a property, that normally means that there was a catastrophic defect that or a catastrophic event that created a catastrophic defect. But so there's two things, right? There was no history in the clue report showing that there was a defective roof. There was no evidence of water damage in the inspection report, right? They just claimed that there was cracks in the tile. Now, the seller would have been willing to replace some of the tiles, but the entire roof was not reasonable. And this is what I'm trying to show you. If you notice what happened, that the inspection and the inspector were just a bargaining chip for the buyer to potentially reduce the price of the property or get a concession for the seller to purchase a new roof. Now, okay, why is this kind of a stumbling block for the seller? Well, it's a stumbling block because if I am putting a new roof on a property, that expense is called a capital expense. And capital expenses appreciate the value of the property, okay? So for instance, if you put capital in an investment, it appreciates the value of that investment. So why would the seller put in a roof and not reap the rewards of the increased equity? So unless, for instance, the seller is scared about losing the deal and doesn't want to start from scratch. And that's why inspection periods are important for buyers, because those are the kinds of things that you can do to potentially get more out of a deal. And that is just one example. So, what is the goal? The goal of walking the lot with the actual inspection report is to determine which line items in the inspection report are things that you want fixed or want credited back to you. And so when you walk the lot, you're just basically creating a list of all the defects that could potentially break a deal. Now, we're going to go over deal killing defects. Okay. Now, these ones we're talking about, for instance, if the underwriter for the mortgage bank, okay, so we're using the FHA mortgage to purchase a property. Now, what happens is there are defects that could potentially get the loan canceled, and if in the event the underwriter finds out that, hey, listen, this property is too risky, there's way too many defects, there's no way we're going to approve this loan for this buyer because it's going to put financial strain on the buyer, and what's going to happen is that we don't want to potentially default because of the fact that this defect can cause huge financial strain on our buyer. Okay, so now we're going to go over defects that, for instance, that your mortgage lender, and if it could basically be like, hey, listen, we're not going to approve this loan because of these defects. So here are all the defects. Okay, so catastrophic defects can fall under a lot of these categories. And you can pull this directly from the FHA website. I think it's HUD.gov is the website. You can see all the line items there. But if we summarize what we've taken from that website, we see utilities, structure, weather, water, deterioration, and paint. So these are all the potential catastrophic defects. These are the categories of the catastrophic defects that could get your loan declined. Now, here are all the utilities, right? We're talking about plumbing, heating, and electrical defects that could, because these can cost up to $10,000, right? And if you are putting a low down payment on a property, we're probably assuming that you don't have a lot of money to do larger capital expenses in the beginning, naturally. So these are some of the things that can get your loan declined. Now, we're talking about structural failing, right? We're talking about floor joists or trusses, or if there's cracks in the foundation that could basically cause a load-bearing wall to fall. Like there was a huge case in Tucson where my engineering professor, there was a plumbing defect underneath a restaurant, and there was a slight crack in the plumbing, and the water eventually eroded underneath the foundation. And sure enough, there was a couple cracks, and then a couple years later, it caved in a load-bearing wall, and it led to a structural failure. So these are the kind of things that similar, even though that was a commercial property, those are the kinds of things that, hey, if we see massive cracks in the foundation, is this going to lead to a potential catastrophic defect, right? So if we see a worn out roof, like in the last deal we talked about, where they saw cracked tiles and they extrapolated, hey, these cracked tiles equal a worn out roof, right? There is signs of normal wear and tear, but because you have normal wear and tear does not necessarily mean that those are signs of catastrophic defect, right? There weren't other characteristics like water damage or cracks in the drywall, for instance, okay? But a worn out roof, for instance, is going to be a potential deal breaker for your mortgage lender. Now, next, if we see drainage problems, kind of like what I was talking about with the restaurant, right? Does the water accumulate on the side of the house? Now, the other reason why is not for potential um, causing foundation issues. You don't want water collecting on the side of the house. Also, if you have a ton of water on the side of the house, guess what? That attracts subterranean termites, and termites, they get attracted to the water and then they find the wood and they just start chomping away at your house. So naturally, you always want good drainage on any property that you purchase. And also, just one last thing about the drainage. Um, you could probably, if you have some drainage problems, a simple fix to like, you don't have to get a structural engineer. Okay, you basically can have a landscaper, and as long as you're following the city code, like not to put too much dirt on the side of the house, right? What you can have a landscaper basically try to level level out the land and create more drainage that way. So there's lots of creative things that you can do to fix that problem. Um, okay, so like for instance, rotted siding, porches, steps, deteriorated brickwork. Like for instance, if they see that there's steps that are deteriorated, they don't want someone to be able to fall through and get hurt. Or yeah, they want to make sure that you're protected from the elements. And the other thing too is there's rotted siding. You want to make sure that the elements are not going to wear down the structural integrity faster, for instance. And these are things that are going to be in the inspection report. Okay, so if the inspection report shows that there's rotted sidings, that's why you're going to physically walk the lot and look for it. You're going to look around and take a peek. Now, okay, now this one, this is funny. Okay, they hate inspectors and FHA. They hate seeing peeling paint on the exterior mainly. Okay, so if they, and then also naturally they hate lead-based paint. Well, most of the paint nowadays you don't have to worry about properties that have lead-based paint, but if it's a house prior to 1970, oh, sorry for the spelling error right there, but we should be fine. 7 years of age. Well, I'm human, so there you go, guys. Okay, so if we see peeling paint, those are things that uh, they're going to probably want to get fixed. The underwriter is going to want to get fixed before. So, yeah, those are some of the deal killing defects. Now, here are some defects that I don't want you to lose sleep over. Here we go. Here's a list: appliances, fixtures, building, termites. Okay, don't stress over decorative and cosmetic work of any kind, carpeting, cracks in the plaster or drywall, right? Unless it's caused by structural failure. Like if you see a massive shift in the wall or the trusses in the roof or a crack in the foundation, right? Unless it's so, especially in Arizona, it's so dry here. It's very common for plaster and drywall to crack, especially cracks on stucco. Like stucco, it's literally just basically fancy mud, okay? And that stuff cracks all the time. Um, let's see, loose hardware doors, broken glass, and broken counterweight. Which actually, what's funny is that I did have broken glass in one of, even though this is direct from the FHA or the HUD.gov site, inspectors don't want to see broken glass. Okay, let's see. Yeah, plumbing leaks. So there's like, for instance, a leak in a toilet or a faucet. Like that's not gonna. Don't worry about that. You can get a plumber in there to tighten some stuff down or angle valve or install a new angle valve, for instance. Here's some of the appliances, for instance, aren't gonna lose a deal rate. Like a hot water tank that's no longer hot, an inoperative range, a dishwasher, disposable exhaust fan, inoperative refrigerators. Like those are things you can. All these things I'm trying to think. Like refrigerators, range, you can just get the appliance company come in and just install a new one, right? A hot water tank, you can get a plumber or a handyman to replace a new one. You can get a plumber or handyman to put in a dishwasher. Disposable exhaust fan, you can get your electrician to do that. Like window and air conditioning, just if it's a window air AC unit, just throw it away. If it's one that's built in the wall like a hotel, get the handyman or an HVAC technician to swap it out. If it's in a window, it's something almost like you can do. Just throw out the old one and put in a new one. Uh, Defective light fixtures. Okay, so this is just kind of like, for instance, lamps or chandeliers. For instance, like those aren't gonna kill the deal. So here's some building defects. Okay, so kind of what I was talking about, right? Um, Roof leaks when the roof is acceptable. Let's say, for instance, we find out in that last situation where the cracked tile did have some water damage, right? And then you send a roofer into the attic to determine that, hey, majority of the ply board is okay. There's really nothing here. If we just fix this leak and fix this crack, the leak will probably go away. So those are some of the building defects. And like what I was saying with stucco cracks all the time. Even the foundation, for instance, if there is water accumulation, it will kind of wear it down, but most of the time it's something you can patch. So, outbuildings. Okay, so for instance, I had, let's see. So if you have a carport or detached garages, uh, unless they're gonna collapse, for the most part, those are not going to be deal breakers either because they're not a part of the property where you're living. Termite damage is something also I actually don't really stress about. I mean, I've had a lot of properties with termite damage, and as long as you get a company out there to treat it, a lot of the times it remediates the issue. And if you need to replace, I was really freaked out one time. I had a property where the trusses looked like they were getting eaten at a little bit, and I had a roofer come in and he replaced parts of the trusses and put some extra support, and I couldn't believe how fast he fixed it. And I was like, a lot of times, a lot of these guys will try to, like, if you're not experienced, a lot of these contractors will be like, oh, it's such a huge issue and all this other stuff. And like, thankfully, one of my guys was pretty experienced in replacing trusses, so it, he took like one afternoon, like 4 hours, and he fixed some termite damage. Other than that, though, unless you can see that like it's been over 20 years or something of termite damage, most of the time, if you just remediate the termites, you'll be fine. Now, here are my final thoughts. I let's see. Okay, so for instance, remember those last line of defects? So it depends on the market, right? In this current market, there are buyers galore because interest rates are low, and recorded in 2020. So, um, if we look at this, what I want you to realize is, do you have a lot of competition for this property? If you do, you probably are like, maybe I shouldn't. If it's not a catastrophic defect, so if I get a handyman here to fix some of the stuff, then don't kill the deal over it, okay? Especially if remember during the inspection period too, if you run the numbers, which we've learned in financial technician, once you've run the numbers as well and looked at the rent roll and looked at the leases as well, um, that's another thing that we should be doing in the inspection report, okay, is double checking all the numbers from the leases and the rent roll. Now, the other thing too is if the sellers, get your agent to feel out the other agent, right? Is the seller willing to budge? Like, how motivated is the seller? If the seller's not willing to budge, then you should be cautious on what you want them to fix or what you want credited back to you. But for me, the most important thing, time and time again, is the HVAC unit. Okay, a lot of these inspectors ask, a lot of them try to upsell you on the termite inspection. I wouldn't actually worry about that. This is my personal experience. Talk with your attorney. Talk, you know, just what does your inspector say? Like every property is different. There could be severe termite damage, obviously, but from my experience, I would prefer to hire a on the same day that I'm hiring an inspector. I normally hire a HVAC technician to inspect the AC unit to determine what needs to be tuned up and stuff. So for me, if I'm going to pick between a termite inspection and HVAC, because I'm going to be living on the property, you bet I'm going to be hiring a HVAC technician to look at the heat pump, to look at the AC unit, and go from there. So all right, guys, that was kind of a doozy, but remember the inspection period is kind of important. This is where you get to physically touch the product, touch the property, and take a look around and see. And also remember, run the numbers too during this time. Is the landlord's numbers accurate to what the market is offering and such? So, yeah, this is kind of the most important part of the contract. This is the most important part of the deal is because also this is your opportunity to potentially back out, right? If you see a catastrophic defect, then you're like, listen, this is way too much. There's another property